Across the world, people have their housing costs taken away as much as half of their income. Have you ever thought of trying to change that? The good news is there is a way. House hacking is real, and we are here to show you how other people just like you have made it happen. Welcome to the House Hacking Podcast. And here is your host, house hacking expert, Andrew Kerr.
Welcome back to the show, and thank you for joining us. Now, if you haven't had a chance yet, be sure to check out our fully updated, absolutely free, and I mean no entering your email address or giving any of us your personal information to get it, our ultimate guide to house hacking. You can get it at fibyria.com/HHguide. Our house hacking guide is a complete in-depth guide to all things house hacking. And again, absolutely free for you because we want to give you more resources to learn about all the things that are house hacking. Also, another fun update, we just revamped our whole podcast page. Now, let me tell you, on the podcast page, we've got a little bit about the show, but the really cool feature we built in there for you was we divided it up into the 6 main styles of house hacking, and there's a little description on each. And then we've taken the most popular podcast episodes under those different styles and listed them out there for you. And this is just our way to try to get you more information on house hacking. Now, with that said, let's get on to today's guest, Carl Jensen. Now, those of you that are interested in the personal finance space, you might also know him as Carl from 1500 Days to Freedom. You know, Carl's been writing the blog for probably 6-7 years now. I first came across him about 4 or 5 years ago, and he just has absolutely amazing stuff. Now, you might be saying to yourself, especially if you're familiar with the real estate world at all, you might be going, Jensen, that name sounds a little bit familiar. Well, the reason it's familiar is because Carl's wife is none other than Mindy Jensen from Bigger Pockets, and she is one of the hosts of the Bigger Pockets Money podcast. Now, in this show, Carl's going to share all about how him and Mindy have done over half a dozen live-in flips over the past 20 years. We're going to talk through how real estate and using the live-in flip experience has added hundreds of thousands of dollars to their net worth. And that, plus the combination of mastering the basics of personal finance, allowed him, Carl, to retire at the early age of 41. We also talked through about raising a family in an almost endless construction zone, how to get your partner aligned on your financial or real estate investing goals, and so much more. And I just need to stop talking and get to it because this is a killer episode for you guys. And with that, let's go ahead and bring on Carl. Awesome. I'm really excited to have you on, Carl. And for folks that don't know really who you are, why don't you just, where are you calling in from? Give us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm out here in Longmont, Colorado. I am 46 years of age. I retired about 3 years ago. My story, quick and dirty, is I had a really bad day at work when I was about 37. It was extremely stressful, my job was. So I went on Google and typed in something like, how do I retire early? I found a couple blogs like Mr. Money Mustache and JD Roth about these guys who claimed they had retired in their 30s. My first thought was, this has to be a bunch of nonsense. What internet scam have I fallen upon? But then I read it. I read them a little bit, and it's all numbers. Once you get to that point where you can live off 4% of your spending, you could feel pretty comfortable that you're in a good place to retire. So I started a blog, 1500 Days, which is the amount of time I thought it would take me to accumulate the amount of money I needed. It was kind of a way to keep myself, I wanted to put everything out there, so to hold myself accountable and to share my journey with the rest of the world. And here I am. Geez, the blog is 7 years old now, and I am since done with work and have more money than I ever thought I would. So I'm in a good place.
Yeah, that's crazy to think your blog is 7 years old, because I remember reading it, which felt like a lifetime ago. But in reality, I think I stumbled across your blog maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So again, thanks for being on. Awesome little summary. But we really wanted to have you on, obviously the House Hacking Podcast is to talk about this sort of live-in flip experience that you did. So I get a good place maybe to start with it is, can you just sort of give us a high-level summary of it, and then we'll really start to dig in after that?
Yeah, I'll tell you how I got into it. Maybe that's a good place to start. About 20 years ago, I had this leak in my shower in the first home I ever owned. So I called up this plumber. He came over and he's like, yeah, it's going to be about $120, something like that. And I could be over tomorrow to fix it. I'm like, okay, great, whatever. I was a white collar guy into computers. I never really worked with my hands that much. This is what I'm going to do. This is what everyone else does. So I waited until the next day. He never showed up. The day after that, he didn't show up. I called him. He didn't return my call. And I was kind of mad and angry. So I went to the library. This is before the days of YouTube, and checked out this book on plumbing that said, oh, yeah, here's all you need to do to change a leaky faucet. You got to take this thing apart and replace this gasket. So I went to the big box store, took this thing apart. It terrified me. This is like my first fix ever. But it took like under half an hour. I had this thing fixed. And I'm like, wow, I just saved like $100. This was like $2 in parts and a little bit of time. This is incredible. The plumber called me up a couple of days later. I'm like, no, sorry. I got it done myself, and I kind of rubbed it in a little bit, I think. But then the thought I had after that is, if this fix wasn't that hard, how hard can everything else be? So I think the next job my future wife and I did was put tile in. We hung new cabinets in this house and started doing all these things. And they're not always easy to do. And it's always nerve-wracking, especially your first time. You don't want to mess anything up. But we found it's not that hard either if you take your time and really be careful and read the instructions on the back of the bag. So I don't even remember your original question, but that's how I got started in living flipping. And eventually what happened with the house, by the way, real quick, is we had bought it for $140,000, and we sold it for $240,000. And much of that was because of these little repairs I did, like tearing out a couple showers, replacing pink fixtures with white ones. So we'd been kind of bitten by the bug at that point. We were ready to move on from this home, but I'm like, we want a little bit bigger house and a nicer neighborhood, but let's find an ugly one and with these cosmetic issues and do the exact same thing. And I think we're on number 8 or 9 right now. I'm living in one right now. You can see the shelves I've stained to put up maybe this weekend. So
awesome. So there's a lot there I want to start unpacking. So, the first thing was you had really mentioned, okay, I was waiting and I was waiting and I was waiting for the contractor and he never showed up. I mean, that's a very common problem that people run into, with the experience that you have. I mean, have you picked up on any lessons to get contractors to actually show up and come out? Or do you sort of say like, hey, if it's going to take me less than an hour, I'm just going to do it myself because I know their minimum service call is going to be at least $100. So if I can do it for $5 in parts and an hour of my time, that's equivalent to an hour, $100 an hour rate.
Yeah. It's working with contractors is, they're not all bad, and I don't want to throw that whole community of people under the bus, but they're very difficult to deal with. I try to do everything myself. My dryer breaks, I find a YouTube video and fix it myself. I'm trying to think of something I've hired someone to do. I guess replacing the radiator on my car. That doesn't really relate to houses, but I do everything myself. I guess the main tip I would throw out there for working with a contractor is try to find people in the down season. Don't try to hire a carpenter in the springtime or summer. If I had a big project, I would try to get everything lined up except for maybe the contractor, him or herself, and try to hire them after Thanksgiving when their work slows down and they're a little bit more desperate and will return your call. I remember we put an addition on a house and I did want to hire a carpenter for that. And we called about 50 people, called and emailed 50 people. Out of those 50, 2 returned the call, and none of those people showed up. They said they would, but it's a hot economy that they don't need my work. They have work at the moment. They're not going to pay attention to you. So, yeah, I think it's all about timing, and maybe if you can find a personal recommendation, someone who has had success with someone. But if you've got any recommendations, I'd love to hear because that's been a sore spot.
What I found is it's 2 different skill sets, right? A really good carpenter won't be the best business owner. or a business owner could be really good at the systems, the processes, the sales, the follow-up, getting out bids, all of that stuff, but they might not be the best at the trade that they're in. So I still, to this day, I bought my first home at 20, just turned 38, like 18 years later, still have the same problem. Contractors don't show up when you want to get them to do bids. Contractors that were killing it for you for 3 years in a row, all of a sudden become an alcoholic, or like they go through a marriage and then their business falls apart, and life happens. So it's a never ending thing. So that first house, you bought it for 140, you sold it for 240. How much actually do you think you put into that home of material cost?
That one was, I didn't keep track at that point, but it was under 10,000 because it was mostly tile. And that wasn't a real fancy house, so we didn't feel the need to go with real fancy finishes. So it was tile, flooring, and some other stuff like a whole house fan. But the cosmetic stuff, the stuff that really makes the difference in the flip, is what we spent the money on. And that one wasn't that much. For other flips, we've spent considerably more because they're nicer houses and you want to be just as good as everything else in the neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what year was that roughly when you bought that place for 140? And then roughly what year was that from when you sold it at 240?
That was around 1998 or 1999, I believe. And we sold it probably 3 years after I purchased it.
So, that wasn't during the huge run-up period of 03, 04, 05, or here recently where, so you bought a pretty good deal, fixed it up, and then sold it for a healthy profit. And did you take that profit and roll it into the next one? Did you reinvest it? What did you do?
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. We took all the money from that and we put it into the next one. And we progressively got bigger and bigger over time. It culminated in a lake house, 3 flips ago. And that one didn't work out so well because the Great Recession hit us right after we bought a luxury home. But yeah, that was our modus operandi. We would take the money and put it into the next one.
Awesome. And then, after that sort of first one or two, were you essentially buying these places all cash, or were you still getting financing and say, I don't want to tie up all my cash, so I'll get a loan for, say, 60% or 70%, and then we'll use our cash for down payment and for fixing it up?
That's an interesting question. I think if you could swing it, cash is the way to go because you're a lot more appealing to the seller. But with that said, the current house, the one I'm sitting in right now, is the only one we've bought for cash. All the others we did not purchase for cash. We took out some kind of loan. There was one, the one previous to this, we could have paid cash for it, so we did not have a mortgage contingency, but we ended up getting a mortgage on it just because rates are so low, and I don't mind leveraging debt. But yeah, if you can, I would recommend coming in with a cash offer and a quick closing. This one, the owner had died, and the people who inherited the house wanted a really quick payout, so we were able to do that. So I felt we got a really good deal on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Take advantage of having that cash to get the deal done quicker and make your offer stand out. So the one I want to know about, and I think is going to be really valuable for folks listening, is this multi-year one that sort of tied into this whole, you pushed too hard, you worked too many hours, not only on property, but jobs to get towards that early retirement. And, the one with the addition and the tarps flying off in the middle of a rainstorm and water coming in the house. And so let's dive into that one. When did you roughly buy that property, and, how'd you find that deal? And let's just start there a bit.
Yeah, that might have been the lake house. That would have been 4 houses ago. So we wanted to go big. We decided we wanted to move to Wisconsin and we wanted to live on a lake. So we bought that one for $535,000. We had seen really nice houses on the lake going for $1 million, but we bought that in 2006, and we all know what happened really soon after that. We bought that in 2006. It took me, we sold it in 2012, and I was working on it right up until the end. We sold it for about $725,000. We probably made a little bit of money on that, but only because I devoted my life and did much of the work myself to it. That one was, you can't go back in time, and I think regrets are kind of silly, but if I could take one back, it would have been that one.
Yeah. And what type of work did that need? I mean, you obviously did the big addition on there. So did you actually hire all that out, or you ended up doing that?
What we did is we hired out the carpentry. So we hired out someone to put a second story on it. And then I took it from there. So we did all the mechanical stuff on it. We did all the flooring, all the finish work, all the trim, all that kind of stuff. The painting. We also remodeled the first floor, gutted a bathroom, gutted the kitchen. So I find the carpentry work is pretty cheap. So even when I'm doing flips now, when we did one at our last house, we actually hired that out because that kind of skill doesn't cost that much versus finish work like tile or trim, that kind of stuff is what you pay for. So I tried to do that kind of thing myself.
Yeah, so you basically hired out to get them to do the roof and siding on it, get it framed out so you could then, it was essentially waterproof, weatherproof, then you could take it from there.
Yes, yep.
So you mentioned you did the electrical work and the mechanical and all that. I mean, I know, and you even said that on your first thing was like, oh, doing the small plumbing repair seemed like really intimidating and, until I had to figure this out. And you went to the library. Now there's YouTube for everything, but for a lot of folks, that first step is intimidating, and looking at something like doing the mechanicals and doing the electrical and plumbing all on their own is just beyond crazy to them. I mean, how did you just work up to that process, or how did you get comfortable with it? And then how was the licensing and permitting side of things doing it from that standpoint with the city?
Yeah, I'll start with the latter part. Most municipalities let you do your own work. If it's your own house, they usually have a clause in there where they want you to live on it a year after all your permits are closed, which is what we did. So most every town we've ever lived in has been okay with the homeowner doing anything they want themselves, with that caveat that you have to live in it. To get to your other question, yeah, the first time you do something, it's not easy. It's very intimidating. You don't want to mess up your plumbing or electricity. You could. Electricity is a fun one because that scares people, but you take proper precaution. And I'll admit that I've shocked myself a couple times and ruined 2 lineman pliers by cutting through a hot wire. Yeah, there goes $30 and a couple sparks and some smoke. But it's not that hard. You take your time, you read your books. In that case, I also had a family member who was an electrician who could give me guidance and help me out with that kind of work. But plumbing is so easy now. It used to be difficult. You used to have to sweat copper pipes, and in most places, Chicago is the only one I can think that's different. You can use PEX and you can use PVC, which makes the job way easier. So it's not that difficult.
Yeah.
You just have to. The hardest part is getting over your fear. I remember I was terrified of all that stuff to begin with, but you do a little bit, and like the big box stores, you can have workshops on weekends. They probably don't now because of COVID, but on Saturdays, you used to be able to go into Home Depot or Lowe's and they would teach you how to do tile. So it's not that bad. You read a lot, you study, and then you just go after it a little bit and take your time. And I don't know, before you know it, you'll be maybe not an expert, but enough to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, I mean, you guys have done multiple of these, and with that house, the lake house, you bought it for $535, sold it for $725. Do you remember with that one? And you had it from 2006 to 2012. So that was a pretty long period of time of 6 years. And were you essentially working on it the whole time?
Yeah, I pretty much was, and I had a full-time job also, so it was quite miserable. I would not recommend that anyone do what I did in that case. I'm trying to think what I would do different. I would have taken it slower, and maybe I would have tried to stop working or going on part-time. And we also had children at the time too, so it was not a good decision. And the house we did after that was similar. I didn't learn my lessons, so that consumed my life for a while too. And financially, it's very good. But your children are only young ones. At the end of that one, I did leave my job, so that did make it a little bit easier. But friends would say, "Hey, have you seen this in this TV show?" Like, yeah, sorry, dude, I haven't turned on my TV in like 3 years. I was up till midnight last night trying to fix my drywall or whatever.
So that first house, you said you put $140 in it and sold it for $240, and you only had maybe like $10,000 of work. So, you're walking away with $50 to $75,000. This lake house, there was about 200 grand from what you bought it and then sold it at. And I know you've got closing costs, commissions, you've got some materials. If you're doing all the work, I mean, this live and flip process over, doing 8 or 9 of them over what's now a 20-year period. I mean, this essentially could add $1 million to your net worth over time if you're, doing a live and flip and benefiting 50, 75, 100 grand a year.
Yeah, I think you're right. If I haven't done the numbers recently, but especially with this one we just bought, it will add probably about $1 million. And the thing is, you have to live in a house isn't necessarily a great investment, especially if you buy a new house in a cookie cutter subdivision. So why not buy one that's slightly cruddy, that has work that you might enjoy, that you might want to learn how to do, and build some equity in there, make the house work for you instead of you working for your house. Another tip I have, you mentioned commissions, is one of the first things we did early on was get a real estate license and find a low-cost broker to work for. So now when we buy the house, we get to keep that 3%. And then when we sell it, we keep the 3% from that side too. That saves you tens of thousands of dollars in realtor transaction costs.
So, I mean, you obviously did a lot of flips. I mean, the person that maybe is going to do one transaction every 3 years, and they might say, okay, great, we're just out of college. I'm going to do 2 or 3 of these till I'm in my early 30s just to help set me up. Is it going to be worthwhile to get the realtor license at that point? Or, there's always online a big debate of, there's extra liability if you're actually licensed or not. And then, is it actually worth it? I mean, it obviously clearly for you guys, just following your blog, I know you had probably looked at it from a cost benefit perspective and it worked out really, really well.
Yeah, it's been excellent. The other thing is you might have a friend who says, hey, I want to buy a house or I want to sell my house. Hey, okay, I've got a license. I know you're not going to be a difficult client. I'll split my commission with you. We're still making like $5,000 or $10,000 for plopping a sign on the yard and an MLS insertion and giving a little guidance along the way. So it's absolutely been worth it for us, but it was time. I don't have the license. Mindy got it. And it was, I think, $700 for the online course. And then she studied for months for it to the online class. If you're married and have 2 children and have a full-time job, maybe not. But at the time we were married. And I had a full-time job. She did not, but we had 2 kids, but we were pretty hungry. I would not do this right now at our current place in life. But yeah, if you're young, I know plenty of people who've done this. Craig Kierlop, who used to be at Bigger Pockets, is another one. And I think it's a great idea. One of the things to make that work is to find a broker who won't take half your commission when you have a transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one of the things that really comes up a lot of, I can't house hack, because the traditional house hack most people are familiar with is you're renting out all the rooms. So people are like, oh, if I've got a family, I don't want to do that. It only works when you're young. And then the other option is that sort of small multifamily that most people think of. And in not every city, but a lot of cities, the multifamily tend to be in B and C areas, not in A. Like where I'm in New Orleans, I mean, you can have $1 million duplex in the heart of the Garden District. But I love this idea of this live and flip. And you guys obviously have done multiple of them over this 20-year period, but you did it, dating, married, with kids. I mean, are there any things you would have done differently or any things you could say to someone that's like, oh, I have a family, I couldn't do a live and flip, but you clearly did it?
Yeah, I think you can do it. You have to be picky about the house. And that's the most important, crucial part. It took us 2 years to find the house we live in now, but I'd rather wait to find a great deal than jump in to find a fair deal. I want there to be lots of upside, and I want to have a high level of confidence that this house is going to work for me. But yeah, I think everyone can carve out a little bit of time. You don't have to devote 30 to 40 hours of your week like I did for some of these, which is a bad idea, and I would not say that to anyone. But it doesn't take much time to paint some rooms, to do some landscaping, to learn how to swap out a pink or blue toilet for a white one, to lay tile. This stuff isn't that difficult. You want to be very careful. You want to find a house that has things that need to be fixed that are within your skill level and things that you might enjoy doing. I like designing rooms. I like framing out basements and things like that, but that might not be something you want to do. But Yeah, you have to proceed with caution. You don't want the home to consume your life. You don't want a cats in the cradle situation where your kids never saw you because you were always swinging at the hammer or whatever. But I think you still can. A lot of people will see a house that isn't staged correctly or is a little bit older. My favorite houses are built around 1980 because they tend to be more solid. But if they haven't been updated, they're cosmetically ugly. And that's stuff that you could do on your own time. And I like to hold mine for at least 2 years because you don't pay capital gains up to $250 for a single or $500,000 for a married person, which is huge. Think of that. No capital gains, but there's no rule that says you have to sell it after 2 years. If it takes you 5 years or 6 years, who cares? You're still going to be making $50,000, $100,000 on the sale versus your neighbor who might make 20 because they bought their house in perfect, pristine condition.
Absolutely. And I mean, obviously for folks that don't know who Mindy's a community, is she still the community manager at Bigger Pockets? She's also the host of Bigger Pockets Money podcast. So, I mean, you guys, was she more into real estate when you got started, or were you, or I mean, because this sort of like from the outside, it seems like a perfect pairing of like two spouses really on board. And I mean, how did that early relationship develop of, real estate's going to be a thing that we do together to help build longer term wealth?
Yeah, I think we were both kind of on the same page, although we didn't know it. I think about this often because it's so important to find a spouse who's on the same page with you with money and what you just said. And it terrifies me a little bit, but I don't think we ever talked about any of that stuff. I guess we both kind of knew it. We had both actually owned a property when we got married. So she sold her condo and moved into my place. But yeah, I guess I could tell we were kind of on the same page. We went to her condo when we got married and did a bunch of tile work in there and painted, fixed that up. And when we sold that first house for $240, I'm like, oh, let's do this again. And she's like, yeah, this is a great idea. So I suppose if she would have said, no, this has been horrible, I don't want to do this, our life would have gone in a completely different direction.
I mean, you have any tips of like how maybe to approach a spouse that isn't quite on board with, not even necessarily real estate investing, but like, how do you have some of those conversations of getting a spouse on board with sort of aligning your personal finances and making more smart money choices, whether you're going to invest in an index fund or you're going to do a flip or a live-in flip or really sort of any sort of investment?
Yeah, it might be easier just to find a new spouse. No, I'm just kidding. I've thought about that question a lot because so many people ask it. And what I've come to is you have to, it's really an assessment of values and deep, deep long-term goals. So if you said to someone, what makes you happy, and especially where do you want to be in 20 years, most people probably aren't going to say, I want this car that costs $100,000 or something like that. They're probably going to say, I want to raise smart, well-adjusted kids. I want to have a happy life. Maybe I want to live on the beach in Hawaii at some time. And when you look at people's goals, especially the long-term ones, when you start stepping it backwards, yeah, the next part of this is to work back. Okay, how do we get there? We should save our money. If we don't buy this car now and keep driving our old crappy Honda, then we could put X amount away. And then in 20 years, we will be able to live like that. So it's really, really forcing people to think long-term because I think I've been there too. I don't want to sound like I'm preachy, although I probably am, but we had a house that was almost 5,000 square feet. I did buy a luxury car. It was my high school dream car. And what I found is neither of them made me happy. The house was just more toilets to clean and more stuff to vacuum because it was huge, and the car was another shiny object to worry about in the grocery store parking lot. Is someone going to ding this thing or run a cart into it? So now I'm perfectly happy with my 2003 Honda Element and our old crappy Mazda. Unfortunately for me, I had to go to the other side and realize these things don't make me happy. But yeah, when I think of what I want out of life, it's not spending. It's not going out to eat constantly and things like that. Having the money and having the options to do things later in life, even though I might not know what they are, just knowing that I'll be able to do them when I realize what they are is deeply comforting to me, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really great advice of this. Let's look out 10, 15, 20 years and then realize, okay, if that's where we want to be together as a couple and as a family, then start to back it out and realize, hey, these choices we're making, or the plans that we have are not going to get us there, and then sort of realign those with your values. I know something that I found not only in relationships but business is if you're trying to make changes is just look at it as pilots and short tests where folks most of the time don't want to change or are afraid of change. But if you approach it of, let's just test this out once. Let's try a live and flip for the 2 years. And if it doesn't work out again and we don't like the process, we don't ever have to do it again. Or let's just try this for 3 months and see how it works. And all of a sudden, it's not like I'm giving up this whole thing that I think I love for my whole entire life, but it's like, oh, I'm just going to try this for the short period. And that starts to help to reinforce other habits. But, stepping back from the couple in the relationship side of things, I mean, how was this raising kids in, essentially almost an endless construction zone over, their whole life? I mean, to me, I automatically go as like, man, they're going to be well-adjusted kids. I sort of feel like they probably picked up some basic framing or learned about some things and pricing and getting a better, the wall's open. Like, oh, there's wires. Oh, that's how, like when I turn the faucet on, where the water goes. But, I love real estate. So maybe that's just where I automatically think of.
Yeah, raising kids is interesting. I think, so my kids are 13 and 10 now. And when they were younger, I don't think they really cared much or even noticed. It's just what dad did. But now that they're older, it can be a little bit challenging. I do try to get them involved. Like right now I'm building this deck and pergola. I was doing that before the call. So I tried to get them involved. Hey, child, here's a drill. Here's how you're going to use it. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. But there's been some issues with it too. Our older one is getting kind of self-conscious and she's like, Dad, I'm not sure I want to have my friends over when there's stuff everywhere. The backyard is a mess. I'm like, okay, I'll get it done. I'll get this pergola done, and I'll bet they'll think it's really cool once they see it's done. But I hope what I'm doing here and the bits that I've involved them in, I hope it gives them the confidence to try this stuff. It seems like when I was growing up, everyone in my family was very hands-on. If something broke, you just took it apart and tried to fix it yourself. And it seems we're more and more, we don't do that. We don't work with our hands. And I hope I can convince my girls to do that a little bit more as they get older. It'll make them stronger adults, more resilient, I think.
So do they get that, here you are in your 40s and not going into work? Like, are they at that age where it sort of dawned on them that, hey, our parents live a different lifestyle and life is more comfortable because of all these live and flips we've done and investing? Or is it just, are they not at the age yet where it's like, oh, this is my dad, he does this stuff all day long? It's not really quite clicked in yet.
Yeah, I think we've never been shy about money. I kind of, I show my net worth on the blog because I think it's kind of sad how we treat money as such a taboo subject in America, at least, and how we worship people who have money. I don't like either of those things. If we would all just talk about money, I think we'd all be a little bit better off because then we could help each other off. So our girls know our net worth, and sometimes it'll lead to an interesting conversation. Hey, Dad, I want this. I'm like, no, you can't have it. Why not? I know you've got $3 million. I'm like, well, for one, that's my money and not yours. And number two, if you want that thing, you are going to work for it, and here are your chores. And so on and on.
Have you connected that, and maybe they're too young, but the net worth, I mean, some people, even more adults, are like, oh, $1 million is a lot of money, but you can spend down $1 million really quick. But if you've got $1 million in the bank, it can produce 40, 50, 60, 70 grand a year in cash flow. I mean, has that connected with them yet of like, yes, we do have this high net worth, but we can't spend the principal down? Or are they sort of too young for that conversation?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they understand that part. Compound interest is a difficult concept for young minds to understand. What I do with them is they have an online bank account, and I have agreed to match to pay them 1% a month in interest. So they earn 12% plus, whatever that comes out to. So I try to teach them that way. The older one definitely understands it. She's like, oh, Dad, I want to see how much money you're going to add just because I had it in the savings account. And the younger one is like, we'll go to Target or whatever. Dad, I want that. Yeah. Like, well, you can have that, but if you buy that money isn't going to be earning interest. He's like, okay, I want it now. Like, so maybe it'll sink in. Maybe it'll sink in. You like to think you raise them exactly the same, and then they still have their own personalities, nature versus nurture, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can guide them along so much, but sometimes we have to make our own mistakes. One thing just to call back really quick, the whole righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, that's how my dad taught me is, those little things where it's so crazy. Like I still have, but I had a friend years ago, his car broke down on the side of the road and a bunch of us were with him, and he never knew how to do anything, and he just pulled out his AAA card, and then they're like, okay, we'll be out there in like 2.5 hours. And he's like, all right, well, I guess we got to sit here. And it was like, well, all of us were like, you can just change the spare tire. And he's like, well, I don't know how to do that, and my car doesn't have a spare tire. And then, you walk around to the trunk, you pop the thing up, and there's the spare tire, and it like blew his mind. And I think the more we can teach, folks of like these very basic things, it is going to be really important, especially when we end up in a pandemic and businesses aren't open. We don't want people to come into our house. Some of these very simple things of like maintenance and repair are good skill sets to have.
Yeah. If you could just do one thing, like change that tire, it might give you a little bit more confidence from when the next thing breaks. And then, hey, I'll try this. And what I always like to think about in life is the worst case scenario. And usually it's not that bad, and it hardly ever happens anyway.
Awesome. The one sort of last thing I really want to touch in with you and I'm going to get the title wrong of your blog post, but it was essentially that the premise was you pushed too hard to get to, early retirement and financial independence. When you think through that, I mean, would you, looking back sort of at your experience, I mean, would you have not done 8 or 9 live-in flips and maybe said, hey, 4 or 5 would have been better and been a slower pace? Or, I mean, how would you have sort of changed the process now, sort of thinking through and looking back at it?
Yeah, I'll start at the high level and work backwards a little bit. The thought I always had was I kind of, there's this saying, it's wicked to wish your days away, but that's exactly what I did. I wanted to work and accomplish this amount of money. And I thought after I accomplish that, after I make my goal, I'll be happy. After I have my $1 million and no debt, I can retire. And then all my problems will be solved. And in the meantime, I won't enjoy life at all. I'll forego just about anything, including my own health, like not exercising and all that, just to get to this number. And then you get to the number and you realize, wow, I'm not really that much happier. Life is pretty much the same. It's pretty cool that I've got this much money, but it's at that point you learn that happiness comes from the inside and it's something you have to work at. And meanwhile, you should have been enjoying the journey instead of pushing towards this ridiculous goal. You only live once, and especially to go like crazy for your younger years is not the best idea. So if I could do it over again, I probably would have gone part-time at my job sooner. I did that at the very end. So I would have only worked on and I would have scaled back, probably not done as big of projects. Like financially, they worked out great. I've got more money at 46 than I ever thought I would have ever had in my entire life. So that part is good, but it would have been healthier, mentally healthier to cut that weight back, go a little bit slower, continue to enjoy bike rides, continue to do workouts, and focus on health, focus on family. And now that's what I do. It's great. I still have to watch myself and put boundaries around myself. Hey, I'm only going to work at this time. And if I don't get this done by then, I have to let it go and just punt things that during COVID, that's better. I was in the middle of framing my basement and then COVID hit. Hey, guess what? The kids aren't going back to school this year. Like, oh crap. What now? And, so yeah, I would have put more boundaries on myself, taken it slower, had less money. And I would have been happier in the long run. I was always financially insecure. As a child, I saw my parents make mistakes with money and struggle, and I never wanted to be like that. And now I won't be like that. They're good people. They just didn't have the financial knowledge to manage money correctly. So my life was kind of a reaction to that. But now I'm there. I should have done it a little bit differently.
Awesome. Well, Carl, I'm really grateful you took the time to share your story with us. But before we let you go, we like to ask all of our guests a set of 6 somewhat rapid fire questions. Are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
The famous 6.
All right. Number 1, what is your favorite personal finance resource, blog, book, or podcast that you've been reading or listening to lately?
Oh, geez, I could say so many. The best book I've read recently is Morgan Housel's book. And I think it's called The Psychology of Money. It's really, really excellent because he focuses on investing, but more than that, he focuses about lifestyle and why you should be doing this and why you shouldn't care what people think of you. That's really, really outstanding. I think the book formally comes out in September, but The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
Awesome. And then we'll put all these in the show notes for folks. Number 2, what's your favorite real estate related resource, book, blog, or podcast?
Many would tell me I should say Bigger Pockets, but I'm actually not going to say that. I'm going to have a ridiculous answer that's sitting right next to me that you might not appreciate either, but it's this one, and this is called Remodel Plumbing.
Yeah.
When I was doing a job, I got a quote to plumb my addition. It was like $4,000 or $5,000, and then I pick up this book for like $9.99 used on Amazon, and it had everything I needed to learn how to plumb, and I did it for probably, I don't know, a couple $100 in PVC and stuff. So this book has probably made me more money than anything else.
Early in my real estate investing career, I used to buy all those books at Home Depot that had the how to do tile, how to do framing, how to do all that stuff.
The orange books, right?
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Number 3, what's been your favorite travel destination so far?
Oh, there's been a lot. I've been very fortunate to travel all over the place, but God, it's hard to argue with Kauai, the Hawaiian island, the sleepy one. Have you been to Hawaii before?
I have, but not there. So I was in Waikiki for a bit, which was awesome.
Okay. Kauai is a little bit different. You go over this old bridge on the North Shore where they can't get a big truck over, and it's like you went back in time. Just a bunch of people walking around in shorts and flip-flops with surfboards.
So that leads us into number 4. What's next on your travel vacation list, post-COVID?
Oh, I think I just said it. We're going to go back to Kauai, but this time we're going to rent a house and live there for a month or two, maybe even while COVID is going on, depending on what they do for quarantine. I think now you have to sit in quarantine for 2 weeks. But I'd really like. I can't be by the ocean enough in my life, so I'd really like to make it back there.
Yeah, awesome. All right, number 5. What's your biggest bucket list item that you haven't accomplished yet?
I think eventually I'd like to live in a small mountain town. We just spent some time in Salida this past weekend, and just so peaceful, these mountain towns in Colorado. It's not super hot. There's good mountain biking. This one is on a stream, so you can hear the water moving. Yeah, I'd like to live in one of those towns, I think.
Awesome. And number 6, what is your favorite life hack?
Oh, my favorite life hack. Okay. The thing I tell people is to forge your own path and never, you don't have to pay attention to what other people say. You don't have to live the life that other people think you should. And I got this from the Mr. Money Mustache blog. That guy is my neighbor. I'll tell you a quick story. I know this is rapid fire, but one day he called me up. He's like, yeah, can you help me with this project? So I went over to his house, and he had rented a tractor, dug out the foundation, like put rebar right. And he's like, yeah, the cement truck's coming. So you're going to help us cement? I'm like, who the heck does this? Like, wow, I can fix a pipe or plumb my house, but this guy is like pouring a foundation and rented this tractor thing from this store. This is crazy. So you don't have to live the path just because everyone else is doing it. If you do normal things, you get normal results. Try to think for yourself and accept the advice of the experts, but try to go about things in an unconventional way. Awesome.
And then Carl, I really appreciate you being on. Give us the name of your website one last time.
My blog is 1500days.com, just the number 1500. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again. We really appreciate you coming on to share your story.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to the House Hacking Podcast. For more up-to-date information on house hacking, to access links and resources mentioned in today's show, and connect with a guest and host, head over to www.fibrei.com. That's www.fibrei.com, where your house hacking journey begins.